Day 1257 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 1,056,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 920 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, no tanks, 2 APVs, 45 artillery, and successful strikes on 1 oil depot and 2 oil refineries. Can you believe it? So headed to the map now, as fires broke out in multiple regions across Russia over the weekend, and especially overnight, simultaneously, resulting from the AFU conducting a series of long-range drone strikes against Russia's defense industrial base. So to start off the map, fixed-wing UAVs targeted an oil depot in Sochi. Again, setting ablaze a 2,000 cubic meter fuel tank. The strike occurred in the Adler district, which is just a stone's throw away from the Sochi International Airport. Multiple tanks were hit, creating a massive engulfing fire and causing strong successive explosions throughout the night. Several drones not only struck the oil facility, but also landed and detonated near the airport grounds. And with the regional governor reporting that over 120 firefighters were battling the blaze. Of course, it was just over a week ago, on July 24th, when the very same depot of the Lukoil facility was targeted, all done so as a means to degrade Russian aerial military assets in the region due to the very nature of its close proximity to the Sochi airport. Then also to be found on the Russian map, because it wasn't only depots on the menu, as up in Kostovo of Nizhny Novgorod, where one of the largest oil refineries in the country was reported to be struck by Ukrainian drones again, the Lukoil refinery. And for a location that is at least 800 kilometers from Ukraine, and realistically about 30% longer than that for the indirect flight paths that these one-way attack UAVs invariably take, this refinery had a refining capacity of over 17 million tons per annum, accounting for over 6% of Russia's total refining output, which was once upon a time, but has now been struck 4 times this year alone, in January, March, June, and then again just last month. In fact, it's been targeted more than that, but these previous dates were confirmed to have hit and caused fires, sustaining damage and operational disruptions at the facility. Then, prior to that event and earlier in the weekend, we saw the precise moment of a Ukrainian UAV attack on the Novokubushevsk oil refinery, operated by state-owned giant Rosneft, located in the Samara region, over 600 miles and just over 1,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, causing a massive fireball and significant damage. And as far as fireballs go, not the biggest seen in this war, but certainly one of the top 10 most iconic looking. So clearly, Ukraine is switching gears back to targeting Russian oil refineries, coincidentally, or not so coincidentally, happening just mere days after the US has rather officially come to modify or changed its trajectory on its position on this war, becoming decidedly more assertive in signaling a shift towards more direct action in support of Ukrainian defense and freedom. Then on the map, and for Ukraine going for a weekend infrastructure hat-trick, with consequences of the strikes by drones targeting a key railway in Russia's Rostov region, striking the traction substation along the Zamchelovo line, which resulted in extensive damage, with the entire area consumed by flames. And it's a strike that further disrupts Russian distribution networks, which is, at this location, a key position in heading to the SMO zone, with Ukraine who continues to target critical supply lines, with the impact on the Russian military's readiness, which will become increasingly evident. So from a Ukrainian main Directorate of Intelligence standpoint, it's fair to suspect that Ukraine has held off on targeting such key assets this whole year in order to catch the summer Russian army off guard. Had they started sooner, Russia may have been able to pivot and move across to an earlier reliance on non-electrified railways or an extensive fleet of trucks to mitigate supply issues, if such an option is even available to them. Then to some more miscellaneous occurrences in Russia, right by its southern Dagestan region, by the Caspian Sea, city, where at least 42 streets are without electricity due to an accident at the Teplichny Kombinat substation. The cause of the transformer fire is not specified, but so far appears to be a genuine coincidence in timing, not likely to be related to the overnight aerial attacks. And then to Voronezh, with additional fires to be seen, with no specifics on the targeted outcomes, though the events in this case resulted from UAV activity, as ground reports suggested as much, alongside claims of no air defenses activated, not even small arms. And speaking of Russian air defenses, how many thousands of S-300 air defense surface-to-air missiles did Russia use at the initial phase of this war, wastefully rigging them up for ground attacks on Ukraine? And for that failing cause, they dwindled their stockpiles of somewhere in the range of between 5,000 to 8,000 missiles designed to neutralize aerial threats. However, with a lack of reports to suggest much usage at all of those surface-to-air missiles, it seems that Russia well and truly evaporated those stockpiles, all but gone now. Then also, for these weekend events, there was no shortage of Russians taking delight of the moments, sometimes even taking selfies or videos with the flames in the backdrop. I believe this one was at Sochi. And it's far from isolated, because we've seen a lot of videos every month of Russians laughing behind the camera or posing behind Bavovna-class fires, which could suggest many things, and perhaps even a limit to their own patriotism. And so to summarize all of these latest series of incidents, best to put it in the words of Bordenov, head of the Ukrainian main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense, to say yesterday, quote, "My task is to do the maximum for the country so that it becomes great and majestic. I am not interested in small results." End quote. No small results indeed. Then to head across on the map and to touch on specific sectors of activity in the Ukrainian map today, where in the southeast of the Donetsk front lines, Russian forces captured a few square kilometers further south of the main, or second to main, offensive on this part of the map at Zeleniapol, which is near to the bordering Dnipro-Petrovsk region, as Russia continues to work a very attritional grind on this southern front. And then beyond the immediate front lines of Donetsk, information and imagery on some of the latest Ukrainian defense networks, in this case west of Kramatorsk, where Ukraine has launched record-breaking speed in construction of defensive fortifications as time has pressed on, with the army focusing on rapidly building trenches, anti-tank ditches, layered barbed wire installations, and minefields along the eastern front. Existing trenches are being deepened and equipped with shelters for groups and stations for drone operators as well. And for these particular images, this example site is at least 30 kilometers west of any of the closest Russian ground forces, and is not the first major line of defense, but the situation is nuanced, as these lines can sometimes get blurred in terms of first, second, or third lines of defense labels, as a lot of the fortifications are part of a broader and more complex multi-layered defensive strategy rather than a singular isolated line, depending on the location. Then to take a brief look on the map at some of the western edges of Zaporizhzhia, as the AFU advanced north of Kamiansk, which has been a particularly active zone most recently, with Russia still intent on capturing the capital city of Zaporizhzhia, because, and this still blows my mind, this Ukrainian city has been added as a federal subject of the Russian constitution, even though the Russian army has never ever in its entire history set foot in the city. Nevertheless, the Kremlin childishly decides to write this city and many other areas as Russian ownership within its own constitutional framework. Then also on this part of the map, Atesh partisans behind Russian lines destroyed a relay cabinet in Shelkovo at a section of the railway leading to occupied Berdyansk by the Sea of Azov. As we can see, these groups continue to thrive, with no end in sight for these types of attacks, highlighting the ongoing resistance and instability within the occupied region. Then to head right next door, as Russian forces performed an airstrike targeting and heavily damaging a bridge in Kherson city that connects to the district of Korabelny, and therefore leading to the potential for the district to be completely isolated from the city. Now, despite being on the Ukrainian-controlled right bank, Korabelny remains under constant fire, with up to 4 strikes per week reported, even while civilians eke out a precarious return to daily life. Now a question might be, would Russian forces use such an opportunity to advance beyond the Dnipro River and take the northern district? Well, that would be extremely difficult, very risky, and highly unlikely. The Dnipro is wide here, around a kilometer in width, with swampy, unstable terrain on both sides, so any attempt at this by Russian forces would need to have a truly significant commitment of boats and personnel for an amphibious launch, those of which who would become exposed for long stretches of the river that is a heavily AFU monitored river. So instead, damaging Ukrainian-held bridges and road crossings has been a core Russian military strategy used as a means to force supply bottlenecks designed to hinder any movement of the armed forces of Ukraine. Oh, then lastly to show on the map, Ukrainian forces made a slight advancement into Vovchansk, up in the northern Kharkiv sector. Then to take a look at some news, as Vladimir Putin has commented indirectly on the situation surrounding the Trump administration's August 8 deadline for Russia to engage in Ukrainian ceasefire talks. During a visit to a monastery in Russia, Putin attributed frustrations in peace negotiations to inflated expectations, quote-unquote, seemingly referencing Trump's expressed disappointment over Russia's lack of progress. Meanwhile, the Kremlin has yet to employ a coordinated response to Donald Trump's August 1st announcement that he ordered the deployment of 2 US nuclear submarines to be repositioned closer to Russia, although individual Russian lawmakers have dismissed the move, seeming to suggest not a lot of relevance in the matter. Meanwhile, US Permanent Representative to NATO, Ambassador Matthew Whitaker, has stated that the US, by selling American weapons to NATO allies, plans to put pressure on Russia to bring it back to the negotiating table and ensure a ceasefire, with the supply of those weapons going to Ukraine. Of course, it was just last week that the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated that after a meeting with representatives of Putin's inner circle to find common ground and agree on ending the war in Ukraine, that despite extensive dialogue, no progress was made and no agreement on establishing peace could be reached. Nonetheless, US Special Envoy Witkoff is headed to Moscow right now in a trip that would mark his 4th visit to Russia since Trump returned to the White House in January of this year, although this particular upcoming meeting has very little hope for any high expectations. But ultimately, the change in US direction for its foreign policy can be seen to be on a modified path. Take for instance, the US Senate Appropriations Committee recently advanced a defense spending bill which includes a record $800 million for the US Security Assistance Initiative to bolster Ukraine's military amid the war with Russia. The bill is not fully approved yet, and with the rest of the US military hardware for now coming from Ukrainian and EU purchases to bolster their defenses with, a situation that is a spot better than what things used to be earlier this year. Then headed across to a soothing finish to the video, something a little bit lighter, simply entitled The Combat Cat Massage, with a few Ukrainian soldiers becoming subject to these non-optional massages after completing their field combat tasks, with this massage genuinely looking like it is worthy of the name. So that has to be it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like. Thanks for all of the comments, the support, the everything. It's very helpful for the channel, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!